If there was a single character that served as the perfect example of what walking delusion looked like, it'd be Jimmy Pegorino, head of the Pegorino crime family. And I do actually say family in quotes, because, well, it really wasn't much of a family at all. Hell, even LCPD criminal records officially referred to it as a syndicate. And even if by some chance those records came to recognize it as an official family, its paper stamp would sadly be the real extent of its supposed authenticity. Jimmy's organization was a reflection of himself, a person who lacked any real recognition, any real respect, and any real power. Yet ironically, he didn't see any of that. Despite him seemingly holding the commission and the mob's values to such high regards, he simultaneously managed to contradict them. Despite trying his hardest to appear strong, he did nothing but appear weaker, and when meeting Nico for the first time, he did his best to flex his intelligence and prolific criminal record by speaking in a circle that really went nowhere.
Were you followed?
I don't think so.
Ah.
I mean, who knows?
Exactly. I mean, we can pretty much guarantee you were followed. The question is, did you know about it? And right now, I don't know the answer to that question. But to be honest, I don't really care neither.
Apart from John Gravelli, the most respected and head of the strongest mob family in Liberty City, Pegorino gives us not just the greatest insight to what a dysfunctional parody of what a family looks like, but how a person can bring all the problems they have to themselves, while they're unable to identify their mistakes and actively letting their own ego-driven hopes for the future dictate their next unfortunate move.
What the fuck is up with the diamonds? That ice was a real fuck-up. Ray didn't go through the correct channels. Guy who owned the diamonds, Gay Tony, is in with the enchiladas.
Upon rewatching some recordings I had on Pegorino's Pride, which is the first mission Nico does for Pegorino, I realized something that hadn't originally popped out to me. But there is two very different conversations you can hear him having with Nico on their way to an initial meeting with the Pavanos. Now both of them are slightly different in tone, but they all come together to give a very clear idea of one, how disjointed his organization is, even from Pegorino's own perspective on the matter, and two, the ego he has and his inability to acknowledge the organization he is running and its perception. In both of these conversations, he mentions Ray Buccino and a mess with the diamonds.
Left.
Nico, this is Pete and Marco. Guys, Nico. He's the one who's been keeping Ray from drowning in a pile of shit. What the fuck is up with the diamonds? That's why Ray ain't ever gonna make it to the level he wants to reach. He's too busy thinking about himself. That diamond fuck-up is case in point. I'm like a fucking chess player.
So naturally, I think it's best to start there with the diamonds and Ray's involvement. Now, Ray, according to Jimmy, is a capo, but again, they aren't a real family, so he's more akin to a crew leader, someone who operates under Jimmy, pays tribute and respect to him within the system of a mafia family, but isn't actually one. In addition to that, he has his own illegal activities, with the diamonds being an independent venture of his, one he knew from the very start that he could not get involved with.
Listen, I got a little business proposition for you.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, I know about some diamonds. Illegal, never in the system, easy to move, no insurance, couple millions worth. Problem, I can't be seen near them. All right, let's just call it a conflict of interest.
In hiring Johnny Klebitz to steal these diamonds for him, he doesn't go into the specifics as to why he can't be seen anywhere near these diamonds, and his initial hiring for Johnny to lift these diamonds from Gay Tony is a perception we only get later in the Lost and Damned DLC. So the best insight that we're given through the main story of Grand Theft Auto 4 is through Pegorino himself, explaining Ray didn't go through the proper channels. He didn't make sure that he was given permission to even go through with these jobs. Before we even continue with the Pavanos, the Commission, or any outside entities whatsoever, we need to look at this move by Ray. For one, he even acknowledges that what he's doing is forbidden. And when Jimmy says Ray never went through the correct channels, he meant himself, as he's the head of the supposed family, and thus anything his subordinates plan on doing have to at the very least be shared and approved by Jimmy. The diamonds weren't. And Ray's words of conflict of interest is a major understatement because it undermined Pegorino's very hopes of being officially acknowledged, of having some chance, some hope, of landing a seat on the Commission. For those unaware, the Commission is a governing body of mob families. They would have representatives come to a sit-down where expansion, territories, business plans, disputes, anything they're involved with and other families are involved with were to be all discussed and settled. If you're on the Commission within the mob world, you're both recognized as a legitimate organization, and politically, you and your businesses are protected from the other families. Technically, it's never that clean, but it does save you from all-out war and bloodshed. In Grand Theft Auto 4, there are 5 families total. The Ancelottis is one of them. albeit the weakest. Now, what I absolutely love about the politics here is it's multi-layered and even funnier in regards to what Pegorino's hopes are. For one, when you hear his fear of the Ancelottis finding out, it's worried about the commission hearing this major mistake of betraying the rules they supposedly all abide by and going out and attacking, at the very least, Ancelotti affiliates.
A lot of people said those diamonds were theirs.
Tell me about it. But I don't give a shit about them other people. What I'm worried about is our involvement with getting back to Gay Tony and his connections. We got a lot riding on this meeting with the Pavanos. Want to keep relations sweet with at least one of the families that got a seat on the commission.
It's a valid fear, but it's very much the wrong one he should have. Since he isn't on the commission, nor do the other families, or any of the legitimate, real families, respect him, the fear he should have shouldn't be their involvement with the diamonds hurting his quote-unquote sit-down with the Pavanos and thus his voucher for a seat within the commission. His fear should be his move from being seen as a nuisance at best to a legitimate threat that just moved in and touched an Ancelotti operation. Because this in turn would now demand for the Ancelottis to respond and treat him as an actual threat, officially stomping him out. And that doesn't require the Ancelottis to go to the commission whatsoever. They don't need permission from anybody else. Pegorino's not protected. And let's say in the off chance he tried to plead his case and say Ray was a part of that, now he becomes a bigger laughingstock because of this massive amount of insubordination that he appeared incapable of responding to appropriately. If we move a little further into that same mission, you hear it all again. The same backwards logic. He says he supposedly allows the Pavanos to operate in his territory. He doesn't interfere. He doesn't demand any kind of kickback on their operations. Nothing they do gets interrupted. And in his head, that's leverage. That's a favor he can recall later. A chip he can cash in when he needs their tribute, when he needs their backing, when it's time to approach the commission. But that's not how any of this works. You don't let another family earn inside your borders out of kindness. You don't waive tribute and call it strategy. You can't build credibility by giving up revenue and hoping the other party notices and accepts it as a favor. It's not diplomacy or even kindness through generosity, it's pure weakness. Or even delusion. Everything about Pegorino to them screams he's a street guy who just managed to climb to the right level and respect the right people and somehow get in his head that he runs a similar organization. And we know that because the way this whole meeting comes out. He arranges this courtship with the Pavanos in an exposed industrial yard on what's supposed to be his own turf, out in the open where everyone can see. If this was a real meeting, it would never take place like this. At the absolute worst, if Pegorino was genuinely showing any kind of humility or doing his best to actually court them, he would show up in their territory, paying tribute and respect. Or in the absolute best case, they would be in neutral ground where neither side holds any kind of advantage. And when it came to that point, it wouldn't be held outside like a back alley drug deal. It'd be inside, in a very controlled environment, similar to a closed restaurant after hours like Drusilla's. A private back room, an office above a storefront, a cellar. In hindsight, it makes me actually think maybe Ray was potentially trying to bypass Pegorino and establish his own family. Nonetheless, the whole meeting is nothing more than the Pavanos most likely laughing in Pegorino's face. Maybe even taking advantage of the opportunity to finally get rid of him and outsmarting him by making him hand himself over on a silver platter. Because who's to say the mess with the diamonds and Ray's insubordination was an isolated incident? Given his confused understanding of how the commission works in terms of family's diplomatic maneuvering and how he sits outside of that, it's plausible they figured why not take advantage and get rid of this satirical, dysfunctional crew, leaving Alderney open for all-out expansion. Or maybe it was just some low-level muscle attempting to improve their own position within the Pavano hierarchy by killing Pegorino. Whatever the case, Pegorino's anger at their attempts to kill him greenlights an all-out war sanctioned by the commission due to the Pavanos' betrayal, a narrative that he establishes in his own head. Now, the war with the Pavanos itself only lasts one extra mission. He hires Nico to tail 2 enforcers to a Pavano-run operation, where he then instructs Nico to wipe every man out and allows him to keep any cash he finds. Now, it's really not that noteworthy beyond one of the Pavano enforcers identifying Nico as Pegorino's hired gunman and admitting that Pegorino is desperate. But I think it links very well to the other side of the Pegorino-run operation. The job's handed over to Nico by Phil. Phil Bell is the other crew lead within Pegorino's syndicate, and unlike Ray, who Nico doesn't like or trust, or Pegorino, who Nico also appears to at the very least not respect, or eventually like on account of his own delusions and how he speaks to Nico. Phil is different. Out of the three, Phil would come to be the one person Nico would eventually sound to respect and even build a little bit of a friendship. But Phil is also the most cautious out of the three. He doesn't really speak directly on matters out of fear people are listening in, which is a very genuine fear that we'll return to in just a second. He constantly questions Ray if he properly vetted Nico out, as it's dangerous just to bring in any outsider on their jobs. And when he does give in and finally bring Nico in as the person he can trust, he's still standoffish due to him thinking Nico and Ray are friends, something he's wary of because he neither likes or trusts Ray either.
So you're a friend of Ray's?
A friend? Oh, I do some work for him.
No, I mean a friend.
I don't understand. Whatever you say. He's a slime ball, but he pays.
Sure, pal, sure. Listen to me. The thing about Ray is, he's a good earner. He talks a lot of shit, but he's a good earner. Tabish.
This first real job highlights the distrust and hatred he has for Ray, but more importantly, it's what the job is and how it ties into the rest of the mob families. Phil and Nico head to the docks to steal cocaine the Russians have coming into the city that's meant to be handed over to the Ancelottis, as the Ancelottis are now doing business with the Russians. Phil's men stole the truck the Ancelottis were supposed to drive to the docks, but now with Phil and Nico in said truck, they have the element of surprise, pretending to be Ancelotti's goons. From here, the job is supposed to be smooth sailing. They pull up, pretend to be Ancelotti's men, load up the truck, take off. No problems. Now, Nico would question the simplicity of the plan, saying that even Russian coke runners aren't stupid enough to just offload a massive amount of cocaine without asking any questions simply because they pulled up in the truck they were expecting. There's going to be problems. To which Phil agrees. He knows there's going to be problems. He knows that they're most likely going to have to kill everybody in the warehouse. But it's the plan none other than Pegorino himself put together. It's poorly thought out, seemingly intelligent, and deceptively simple. Yet it also ignores what's at stake. A massive amount of cocaine smuggled all the way from Vice City. This is a very lucrative deal. Nico and Phil would turn out to be quite successful, but what they don't expect is what the Russians end up doing. They turn around and tell the Ancelottis that Pegorino's organization was responsible for a failed exchange, costing the Ancelottis money. Phil would end up hiring Nico again to kill a high-ranking Ancelotti capo to stop him from telling the commission about Pegorino, yet again, interfering with Ancelotti operations. Now, since this move was actually greenlit and admittedly planned by Jimmy himself, it only leads to the question of why. He was so strung out and hell-bent on the whole ordeal of the diamonds and seriously worried about their ties to the Ancelottis. Yet what Phil and Nico did was arguably much louder and a much more aggressive stance that would only compel them to go further by killing a high-ranking capo. It also questions who is really in charge here again. Pegorino's decision to take the coke is a decision that feels very ego-driven, almost as if it was a direct response to Ray's move on the diamonds. It recalls the initial conversation he had with Nico about Ray being selfish, commenting that Ray is where he is and will never get any higher due to his selfish nature, unlike Pegorino, who thinks multiple steps ahead.
That's why Ray ain't ever gonna make it to the level he wants to reach. He's too busy thinking about himself. That diamond fuck-up is case in point. I'm like a fucking chess player.
That original insight makes it feel like they're peers, and not as if Ray's the capo Jimmy claims he is, which is why I say this move feels a little more ego-driven on Pegorino's part. It could be credited as some speculation from me, just like how the commission would respond had Ancelotti's capo been able to return to Algonquin and tell the commission. John Gravelli, head of the Gambetti family, himself appeared to hate hearing the Ancelottis both working with the Russians and themselves selling drugs, as Gravelli had a very strong personal hatred for drug trafficking since he disowned his own son for developing a cocaine addiction. Meanwhile, as far as the Russians were concerned, they were muscling in on his own operations. It's yet another thing we don't know the specifics on, and most likely would have just made Gravelli laugh more hearing Pegorino is fumbling his way into affecting other families' plans he doesn't sanction. From the Pavanos and Ancelottis being hit by the Pegorinos, eventually action would have to be taken by both or by one of them. And that most likely would have happened if it wasn't for the mess Pegorino was already in from a completely different faction.
We got real problems. Police are all over us. Maybe you heard, I got served papers today. Phil yesterday. Fucking Anthony! He was wearing a fucking wire!
Remember how I said Phil was paranoid of bugs and law enforcement hearing in on their conversations? Well, they were. Jimmy's own personal security guard was wearing a wire, which is a massive bombshell. At least it would have been if it was a bigger surprise. By contrast, let's look at Elizabeth Torres for a quick example, as she's the other major profile figure in the game that the police are actively watching and do end up closing in on her. She was a big cocaine distributor who ended up slowly becoming more and more unhinged. She panicked and rightfully was paranoid as people around her slowly turned state. While we can't ignore her angry outburst in killing Manny and his cameraman, she was much more fearful, and it all happened gradually. Her house was full, she was partying, connecting Nico to Johnny, Playboy, Packy. She had security and people were at her side. Until slowly, everyone around her turned stateside. They left her, they abandoned her. She was someone who had the walls quickly closing in on her, and by just being around her, there was a high chance you're gonna catch a hefty prison sentence too. With her, we saw this decline. Pegorino, if anything, was already living in his. The most he had at his house was his doorman, his wife, and occasionally Phil or Ray. His security guard, or doorman, slept on the job and his wife was bitter with this lifestyle, and she appeared to be all too aware the police were watching their house, waving at them and talking openly about her husband.
Hey!
Who you waving at?
Feds, I think. They always drive past at this time.
Does that worry you?
When you marry a dragon, you gotta expect a few knights are gonna turn up to try to slay him. Jackasses. All of them, all of you.
Nice talking with
Whatever. You have fun. Pick a swell guy to kill. Hopefully someone with a young family who really miss him.
She takes no precaution whatsoever, and neither does Jimmy. Aside from yelling at Anthony and joking to have Nico kill him, he does nothing to circumvent law enforcement presence or even heighten his own security within his own household. This is despite him sharing Nico might have been followed in his initial meeting with him, implying his knowledge to some degree of potentially being watched. It's a giant contrast to Phil, who doesn't even speak without turning on radios to drown out their conversations, vetting people thoroughly, and scanning his own vehicles. We see the lack of care by Jimmy through both his wife Angie and Phil's own behaviors. And when Jimmy does finally learn his personal bodyguard is in fact an FIB informant, confirming both Angie and Phil's suspicion of the federal government watching them, Jimmy reacts by later deciding to either kill Phil or Ray, which isn't even on the grounds of them being rats. It's on the grounds of him having to show people that he means business, that he's serious. It doesn't make any sense. He claims Gravelli either spoke to the police or the Ancelotti's influenced his own people to turn on him, completely disregarding much of the police presence is of his own making. Nothing with Bavano's was done quietly, or even the Ancelotti's for that matter, as Nico practically blew a helicopter out of the sky in Alderney. Even if he wasn't identified as an acting mob family, Alderney is considered to be somewhat his territory, as far as the police are concerned anyways. And that would have made him a prime candidate behind the helicopter crash and the dozens of bodies. And then there's Anthony, his personal bodyguard that was wearing a wire for the FIB. Upon learning that Anthony was an FIB informant, Pegorino would snap and decide to give him a phone call. Over the phone, he proceeded to angrily threaten Anthony, which triggered Anthony to have a heart attack. As hopeful as it was for Pegorino, Anthony didn't actually die. Instead, he would be sent to the hospital where he can recover under a heavy police presence that was guarding him. Anthony had a lot of valuable information on Jimmy Pegorino and his organization, and so it was crucial that he pull through this heart attack so that he can properly testify against Pegorino in court. It likewise would have been very suspicious if anything happened to Anthony during this time, as Pegorino would have been his only major enemy. So naturally, without wasting any time, Pegorino sends Nico to power through that heavy police presence in the hospital, killing dozens of police officers in order to disconnect Anthony from life support, leading to, honestly, one of my favorite missions in the whole game for how cold-blooded it is.
Go to sleep, Anthony. You look tired. My arm! Bed! Bed!
I love this mission for how dark it is. Watching him convulse while Nico calmly tells him to go to sleep, he looks tired, is peak Grand Theft Auto 4. Because it shows how insane this game can be at times, along with how much Nico hates traitors. Every person in this game that is a liar, traitor, self-invested, but hides behind a facade of doing what's best for others, masking that selfishness, always gets the most hatred from Nico. Anyways, these are problems Pegorino brought to himself. And when it's time to act, we get nothing but more delusion. he summons what he calls a war council, which is just Phil and Ray arguing. When they calm down and Nico learns what this war council are addressing, it's discovered they're talking about the matter of pest control. In other words, rats and people turning in on them. The heat from law enforcement, primarily on Phil and Pegorino, is now demanding that they act.
Police are all over us. Maybe you heard, I got served papers today. Phil yesterday. We got a couple of boys in jail. I think they might squeal. Somebody's talking. Wants us out of the picture. Maybe John Gravelli. Or them Ancelottis. Somebody got to my people.
So what you going to do about it?
I don't know. I gotta shut someone up and show people I mean business.
Claiming Gravelli, of all people, spoke to the feds says it all, because the two of them aren't even on the same level. Gravelli's long established, considered to be a living legend, even respected by the IAA, the mayor, and other official statesmen. He's also on his deathbed. To think a dying old man would use his last breath to tell on another family is ridiculous. To think that same dying old man would do so to a non-existent low-level gang trying so desperately to become something they're not, constantly fighting with itself and getting tricked into fake sit-downs by other families, is downright comical. He doesn't even affect Gravelli's operations in the slightest. Pegorino's timing to act is also far too late. The time to show people he's serious by clipping his own leaders would have been with the diamonds. Now he is just letting his paranoia take over and kill his own men to prove he's a day late, a dollar short, and far from understanding what the hell he's doing and what he wants to accomplish by getting this done. He doesn't grab any concrete evidence against Ray or Phil, simply going off of thinking about it as a way to prove he means business and committing to eliminating one or the other. It's ironic that he's further eliminating his own organization under the belief that he's proving something to other people, but no one really cares. These legal troubles that compels him to decide to kill Ray persist all the way to the very end of the game. Having burned all of his options, he desperately goes to Nico, the only enforcer, or closest thing he has to an enforcer, remaining to do this deal with the Russians. As he says, it's his last chance. Commission and other families be damned. Now he's in a position where legally he's trapped. This deal helps him out financially and status-wise, somewhat to some degree. It gives him one final shot of being someone. He's desperate, and had Nico been in a very different stage in the game, it would have been very interesting to see how this interaction between the two of them would have went down. Pegorino's initial plea turns to insults and demands for Nico to do this deal, speaking to him as if he has any real power or way of intimidating Nico.
Listen, Mr. Pegorino, I already told you. I got history.
No, you listen, you dumb immigrant fuck. I ain't asking you, I'm telling you, do this.
That look of making sure Pegorino knows exactly who he's speaking to tells us precisely what Nico's thinking. And Jimmy's nobody. And if he has the audacity to speak to him like that, he'll learn the hard way. Of course, Nico softens a bit when he hears he won't have to deal with the Russians, and Phil's gonna be right there by his side to help him out with the deal. If it wasn't for Nico already finding Darko, agreeing with Roman to leave the Russians alone, and establishing a softer, more positive future with Kate, perhaps Pegorino would have been dealt with right then and there. It's not as if he has some big organization with him after all, or refusing to deal with the deal leaves any major consequences. I mean, yes, Kate does die, but that's after the fact. I'm simply saying in the moments of weighing out his options of what to do, realistically saying no has no big repercussions for Nico, but I guess arguably snapping on Pegorino right here doesn't do much either. However, it's not Nico but Pegorino who has the ball in his court. This is his last chance of being someone, and we know just how much he has riding on it based on his phone call with Nico if you do the deal, sacrificing Nico's own principles and sealing Roman's fate.
We're back on top, Nico. The Pegorinos is still somebody. Phil's bringing me my taste of the cash, and Dimitri still got hold of the horse. This is perfect!
I hope your partnership is a fruitful one. Good luck, and goodbye.
You've been a useful set of hands. Look after yourself.
He claims the Pegorinos are back on top, which I'm guessing in his own mind means he was able to bypass the commission and receive validation by aligning himself with the Russians, understanding his deal with Dmitri as a deal that finally made him legitimate, a force to be reckoned with, and possibly even bigger than the commission. When Dmitri eventually betrays him, his final words to his new partner was, "They're partners now, and they're back on top," right before he gets a bullet to the head. It's the ending that signals the gullible side of the illegitimate Don, but it's the revenge ending where Nico denies the deal that I think wraps up Pegorino's story best, as it compels Pegorino personally to conduct a drive-by shooting, and in his final words here, still hold the stance of being on top.
I give the orders here.
Me? Oh, I wanted you immigrant dipshit.
Jimmy Pegorino had the image, for someone who didn't know any better, of being a real mafia family. They had the ranks, the name, the internal respect to some degree. He appeared to understand what he was chasing after, but never had the ability to understand where he actually stood within it. He killed Ray, who he admitted was a good earner, to simply make a point, while refusing to promote Phil any higher simply for his heritage, as he was primarily Irish, something Ray throws in his face reminding him he's just an associate and not part of their actual family. He acknowledged the boundaries the commission respected, but continuously crossed those boundaries, believing he had any kind of protection or any kind of image to uphold, when in reality he had nothing. He barely had any real enforcers or soldiers, and should have been grateful to know John Gravelli at least knew his name, even if it did invoke laughter.
Oh, so you're the one who's getting involved with that nonsense for my dear friend James Pegorino. Thank you. It made me
My pleasure.
Considering the last exchange he has is Nico telling him he worked with some of the old families and that they all laughed in Jimmy's face as they thought he was a complete joke, makes the final scene a little sad for Pegorino. It's tragic watching him react the way that he does, getting angry at the truth instead of just accepting it, because deep down that's what it always was. He wasn't some respected Don, he wasn't on the inside, he was a nobody trying to convince himself he belonged in a world that never really saw him as one of its own. He was living out a fantasy of status and legitimacy that he was really always standing outside of, and to the people that it mattered to, that's what made it all so funny.